Welcome to Age of AI, Politics, Law, and Society, hosted by Medlir Mema, Chris Lamont, and Young Diogenes, in association with the Global Governance Institute in Brussels.
Last time in our show, we discussed how the ongoing fragmentation of the global order is affecting AI governance efforts. Today's guest, Justin Bullock, a colleague here at Global Governance Institute, and dare I say one of the sharpest minds on debates regarding AI governance, has joined us to offer his vision of a global AI agency. Hi, I'm your host, Medlir Mema, and today we're diving into one of the most pressing discussions in the AI discourse, how to govern artificial general intelligence, or AGI. In today's episode, we'll cover 4 key topics: the different types of AGI and why they matter, the institutions currently governing AI and why they may not be enough for AGI, a proposal by Justin for a global AGI agency, and the major challenges in governing AGI at a global scale. Welcome back to Age of AI, Justin.
Nice to be back. Enjoyed our last conversation and glad it went well enough for you to invite me back.
Well, the response has been positive, and we always appreciate you. And like I said, this particular paper that you have, this report, I mean, this is one of those kind of future thinking type of ideas. And so I want to get into that. So I just want to start with some basics, and then we'll just build up to the contents of your report.
Okay.
First of all, because there's so much hype out there, tell us why we should care about the AGI debate. We'll make the distinction between narrow AI and general AI, and then broadly speaking about AGI. But just to get our interest piqued, why should we care about this debate at all?
That's a great question. So we'll talk a little bit about like different forms AGI might take. But the basic idea is that we've seen continued progress in AI since people started calling something AI in the 1950s. And there has been these waxing and waning summers and winters of AI going back till then. And around 2010, deep neural nets made their play at the space, if you will. And we're still kind of living in a time where the major tool for AI improvements is coming from deep learning neural nets. And as a consequence of that, it's funny, you can look at AI books, textbooks from 15 years ago, and they list all these types of tasks that humans can do that AIs can't do. And the classic visual of this is like a valley. And coming up the mountains, it's like a river in a valley. And as the water gets heavier, it gets higher, that's AI's capabilities matching human capabilities in a variety of domains. And when you look at a textbook from like 2015 even, they list all these things like language and handwriting recognition and image identification that AI couldn't do, and it was unclear when these things might be able to be done by AI. You fast forward to today, and we have these large language models, multimodal models, these generative AI models. And basically, a lot of these things that would have been in a textbook 10 years ago, AI can do now. AI has a lot of familiarity with natural language and common sense understanding. Not perfect, but when you look at the benchmarks and what it can do just through your own use, can do a lot of things. Same thing is for like image generation and music generation and identification. We can see these trends, right? And so people like AI scientists and futurists have been thinking about this idea called AGI. And I think it goes back to Ben Goertzel, who's still around doing some research in this space. And people have different definitions, and it's a little bit of a loaded term, but it's basically the time at which AI can do essentially everything a human can do. And this is important because if an AI can complete all the tasks that a human can complete, we might wonder about what are humans' comparative advantages in the economy, and also might the AI be able to outthink us or out-strategize us, or maybe pursue its own goals, maybe because it is on a level par with us that we won't be able to control it. So I think we should be concerned about AGI because, one, AI capabilities do keep increasing. Pretty much all AI scientists think at some point we will get something like AGI. Now, some people think it's 2 years away, and some people think it's 40 years away, and we could talk about the evidence there. But it seems like it will eventually get here, that we might create AIs that are as smart or smarter than us on most tasks. And this has 2 major consequences. One, it could completely disrupt the human economy. if human labor is no longer has a comparative advantage to AI systems. And two, it's unclear that we can maintain control of such a system. So it might be the case that an AGI doesn't pursue the same goals that humans would. And this is some of the leading AI scientists like Yoshua Bengio and others have suggested we might be close to. And just to bring this point home, just this year, scientists that are making these claims won Nobel Prizes. So Demis Hassabis at DeepMind is really concerned that AGI might be right around the corner. And he won with others the Nobel Prize in biology. And Jeffrey Hinton, who has helped come up with these methods back in 2010 with some of his students, is going around. He quit his Google job. He's running around the world saying AGI is basically here and there's no chance we're going to control it, or unlikely, and he won the Nobel Prize in physics. So 2 Nobel Prize winners from this year are saying to the world, hey, this is AGI is almost here and it might be very dangerous.
This isn't the purpose of this conversation, but I'm a little bit disturbed by the fact that you have these people that spend their lives to develop AI. And then they finally have this realization that, oh, wait a second, this may be difficult. This is almost like a little bit of our dangers. This can be an Oppenheimer moment where like, I want to develop the nuclear weapon, but let's not deploy it, let's not use it. And actually, let's go back. Let's go back to that. I don't understand the logic behind it. I think Sam Altman, another direction, he's talking about, hey, please tie my hands because this thing can be dangerous. In the meantime, he's investing billions of dollars into developing the same thing that he's saying it's dangerous. Isn't there a contradiction here? Isn't there a problem? Or is it just basic human nature that we are curious, we want to get to it, but then once we have caught it, we become terrified by what we have created?
Yeah. Okay. So I think there's at least 2 things here. One is it in Sam Altman's interest, for example, to hype AGI so that people are excited about OpenAI? Yeah. Seems like it's in his incentive structure to do some things like that. Demis Hassabis runs Google DeepMind, one of the competitors to OpenAI. And so is it in Demis's incentives to hype this technology to some degree? I think that's right. So there's like these concerns around hype. The first thing I'd say about this is that would make sense as a rebuttal to the AGI idea if they were the only serious people claiming such a thing. And they're not. Again, Jeffrey Hinton quit his position at Google to go talk about these things. There are like surveys of AI scientists that are concerned about this and think it's real risks. So it's not just the people who have financial incentives saying these things. That's one thing. And 2, I think you're right. And we maybe even talked about this a little bit in our first podcast. There's something about the prestige. There's something about the glory, the honor of being the person that creates the really powerful thing. And so that's true of scientists. That's true of business leaders. That's true of academics. It's true, seems like a human nature thing. There's this saying that goes something like, you got to be careful poking the bear or poking the tiger or something like that. And I think for some of these people, at least is how Jeffrey Hinton, for example, and Yoshua Bengio say, have an honest conversion moment where they were like just head down, building these cool tools, think they're going to be great for humanity. And then all of a sudden kind of see the trajectory and see that they haven't solved the technical issues and then are very concerned.
So here then I'm concerned that they have never read a sci-fi book or watched a movie because I'm not sure where the surprise and kind of having a realization that it's happening. Anyways, it's fine. And we understand that people have different motives, different incentives. There's, as you point out, the professional, financial, economic, right? All those kinds of incentives that if I don't do it, somebody else will do it anyway, so I might as well do it. And in my hands, would be safe with somebody else. So I understand all that. Let's get back to the main conversation. And I can get distracted on this stuff too easily. We've been talking about AGI. We're setting the stage a little bit about that. But most of the AI applications that we are playing with these days, narrow AI. What's the difference here between narrow AI, general AI, and AGI? Because this seems to be also a little bit of distinction there, at least in your report.
So I would say that we can think about, in the report, I think about 3 different classifications. Right. There's narrow AI, which you suggest. And narrow AI is, think of a recommender algorithm that Amazon might use or Netflix might use. It's used to do one thing, arguably very well. It's trained on data, but it's only trying to do one thing. And in some ways, even some of the newer systems are like this, like AlphaFold. AlphaFold is the DeepMind product that can predict protein structures. And it's just doing that. General AI is something that can do more general things. And so I think of large language models, foundation models, multimodal models as being a form of general AI.
Okay.
Now, why do I say that? Well, it's because they can do a lot of things. They don't just do one thing. So if you take some of the multimodal, like the new Google, I think Gemma 2.0, it takes in a variety of inputs. It can take in photos. It can take in, we can take in audio. It can take in links. It can take in documents. It can take in just hand typed text. And then it can give you a variety of outputs across these same modalities. So I think of this as like, this is general AI, but it's not AGI with the big A, big G, big I, because when we think about that, we're thinking about tools that aren't just general, but that are as good as humans at most or all tasks. And we do not have this yet. Now, to take the next step in this direction, as I said earlier, narrow AIs have some challenges associated with them, right? So you can think about social media algorithms. Like, it turns out that even though they're doing something narrow, the emergent behavior is to amplify disgust and to amplify hate in a lot of circumstances. So it's not that there aren't any problems from narrow AI, but we have at least some initial way of thinking about these. Another example of this is the flash crash from, I think, 2010, whereas you have narrow AIs that are helping make transactions in the financial market and they misread some data and it triggered some behaviors, and we lost, I don't know what the amount was, but like $1 trillion. And then safeguards kind of kicked in and stopped it. And these are examples of narrow AIs like doing some things that we might be concerned about, but it's in one domain. General AI is a little more concerning and more beneficial. So general AI can do more things than just one sort of task, but because they can be proficient in a lot of tasks, we don't have a great understanding to understand what their emergent behavior might be and how they might interact with other systems to cause harm. And then when we get all the way to AGI, it's this amplified. It's like they can maybe disrupt these things at a level more intelligent than a human could. And this gets us to the next part of the report, which is in the literature, people talk about different types of AGI. And so there are two main types of AGIs that people discuss that think about these things. One is what I call, and I didn't come up with it, but is unitary agent AGI. Unitary agent. That means one agent, right? It's one system that takes a lot of inputs and can do a lot of outputs. And this is like where you see like a Terminator robot or like a Skynet or like the classic sci-fi versions and even the classic versions from like early AI discussions is we have this one AI system that is super intelligent or artificially general intelligent, and it can do everything. We give it some inputs, we give it some outputs. And for people who take these proposals seriously, there's a lot of concern about these unitary agent AGIs because it's hard to disentangle why they make the decisions they do. We can put some guardrails on their behavior, which is what's going on with the large language models, but you can't really inspect super well how a large language model arrives at an output. It is just predicting the next token, basically. Mm-hmm. And this hides the thought process. Now, there are some like attempts in areas like mechanistic interpretability and chain of thoughts where you can see some of it, but it's still very much a black box. Okay, so more recently, I would say in the last 4 years, there's this idea of an open agency AI or open agency AGI. Yeah, what you got?
Yeah, no, just before you get there, because I want to push back a little bit on the characterization of this unitary agent AGI. Because I'm also looking at a report, I'm looking at Eric Drexler's, the open agency model, and there is a series of assumptions that are made there about unitary agent types. And every one of them is negative. And when I hear you, and I'll lay those out, but when I hear you describe it, you're still talking about it much like we talk about LLM. So there isn't really any agentic kind of awareness or self-awareness on the part of these general AI. This is still fuzzy math, right? Just math. It's still stochastic, still about probabilities, still about predicting the next token. So there doesn't seem to be any agency. And yet when I look at the description and the way that Drexler and you characterized open agency models, it's just very negative. And I'm thinking, maybe isn't this what we project onto it rather than what it is? Because it can't be what we don't project onto it if in fact has no agency. So here's what you have laid out here. It says a unitary agent model typically carries assumptions regarding goals, plans, actions, and control. On goals, you say internal to an agent, by default, including power-seeking goals. Why by default? What if we set the default non-power-seeking goals? If we're the ones designing it, then why can't it be that? Plans, internal to an agent, possibly uninterpretable and in fact secret. Okay, we get this. There's a concerns with the black box, how to arrive to decisions and everything else. Actions, performed by the agent, possibly intended to overcome opposition. Again, there's oppositional one instead of cooperation, collaboration. It feels like Hobbes kind of like set up the input conditions of this open agency. If I'm going to like put on my IR hat here and Alexander Wend's kind of like anarchy is what you make of it. And there is nothing a priori, there should be nothing oppositional about these models except for what we ascribe to it. And again, this is the part that I'm a little bit confused and you can help me a little bit. Control. Humans confront a powerful, potentially deceptive agent. So at every turn, we make the choice to characterize this particular agent as distrustful, power-hungry, competitive, and deceptive. Why? Is there something built into these models that we can't have a different type of unitary agent except for along these parameters? Or is this the only way we can have a unitary agent AGI?
That's a great question and a great pushback. What to say about this? Okay. One, and I don't want to go down this rabbit hole too much, but just to make clear to the
what's on the surface. We're not
I think it's unclear whether or not LLMs have any agency. It would depend on how we talk about it and how we think about agency. I think, for example, corporations have some form of agency in how they pursue goals. Mm-hmm. And what we mean here when we're talking about agency, generally speaking, is its ability to try to pursue a goal. And as you know, LLMs, at least on their face, don't look like they're pursuing any goal rather than predicting the next token as their goal. And we would give them goals that would allow them to go pursue things, but it's not clear why they would pursue goals different. It's not clear why they might be deceptive. There's a whole line of literature on this. And I guess the two things that I would say is theoretically, there's an argument of something called instrumental convergence.
Yeah.
And instrumental convergence is this idea that any type of agent that is pursuing goals, its ability to pursue a goal is separate from which goal it's pursuing. All right. And so if we said, like, let's just say like a corporation, to make it maybe more clear to people, a corporation's goal is to pursue profit, right? And as it might pursue profit, how might it go about doing that? And if we generalize all this, what types of things help agents get their own goals? Well, power, resources, making sure no one else controls them. These are things that kind of fall out of a logic of any kind of agent that is pursuing any kind of goal, that if they're trying to pursue that goal, they might want more power, more resources, and not want to be controlled. Okay, so that's like the theoretical argument. Now, empirically, we actually observe some of these behaviors given LLMs. Now, they're toy box examples often, and they're sandbox examples, but we have evidence now that LLMs, when put under pressure, will be deceptive to achieve the goal they're given. So if you give an LLM a particular goal as part of an input, it will then sometimes lie about what it's trying to do while it's going to get its goal that you've given it. So I think we do have a little bit of empirical example that LLMs as entities, if you give them a goal to go towards, would not be truthful. And there's, I think, a lot of evidence on this so far.
Thank you for that. And that helps a lot. So let me just take this one more, and I think this will get us to the open agency AGI discussion, because your characterization of the advantages of open agency AGI are exactly what you just suggested. That is that these are more LLM. And so then they not goal-oriented in and of themselves, but their goals are given by the prompter. Much like we give goals to ChatGPT or Claude or something else, say, answer this question. It serves, the agent is you, right? You have a bounded rationality on the other side of that given agency or delegating tasks to this open agency AGI. And again, I'm going to ask you to, and what I think I'm hearing from you is that even though we don't want to say it, when it comes to the unitary agent AGI, we fear that we may be witnessing emergent characteristics. That is that even though right now we very much look at AI and look at these new developments still very much as mathematical models, algorithm models, but that there is a fear that at some point that may lend itself to some emergent, right, characteristics that actually may develop agentic powers of its own. Is that the fear there? Is that the concern? Is that with a unitary agent AGI, those emergent characteristics and capabilities, in fact, then lend themselves to these kinds of competitive, power-seeking, and resource-hoarding kind of behaviors?
Yes. And I think the way that I would describe it is it doesn't allow for us to disentangle the sub-agents within a unitary agent. So like within a human brain, I'm a unitary agent in some ways, and you can't really inspect the sub parts of my brain making decisions. It's just I take some inputs and then you see my actions. We don't have really great science around why my brain comes to that. Whereas if instead what you think about as an organization that's trying to achieve things, I play a role, you play a role, we have to share discussion and communication to achieve our joint goal. The actual thing is really like that the decision-making is disentangled into multiple smaller units like an organization. Whereas a unitary agent, it's all done in one thing like the human brain, and that can lead to unpredictable human behavior. Whereas if you put it in like an organization or an agency, each of the subcomponents have to interact with one another. So there's a lot of points along the way where you can observe behavior before it acts out on the real world.
So almost there are redundancies and there's decentralization of decision-making, which then makes it impossible for any one of them to control final outcomes. And I guess this gets us to the open agency AGI, right? This is the advantage of that. Tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, so the idea with the open agency AGI, and again, this is in part Eric Drexler, as far as I know, was the first person to really start formalizing some of these ideas. And they're now popular among people who are worried about the risks from AGI and the current pathway of just larger, more general single systems. Okay, so open agency AGI. Agency in this context, you can substitute organization and not think about it in terms like you and I have an agency. Okay. It's like a government agency kind of thing. Open means that we can inspect it. So an open organization AGI. So what does this look like and why is it a little different from the unitary one? Well, I was alluding to this. I think the best mental model for people is to think of an organization. And within an organization, you have thinking about like Herbert Simon and Max Weber. You have roles for individuals and responsibilities. You have communication channels. You have paperwork trails. You have consensus building flowing up and down the organization. So this is the idea that what might be less dangerous theoretically is if instead we have this one AGI model that we put inputs and spit outputs, instead we have 100 of them and we stack them in this kind of hierarchy, and each one has their like specific role that they're playing to lead to the consortium of the actual behavior. And what's really nice about this is if you bound, like you mentioned earlier, thinking about Simon, you bound their roles to a specific thing, but don't allow just unilateral action. And then each of the more narrow agents or sub-agents have to share their outputs, have to develop consensus, and then at some point it flows upward and a decision is made. But at any point in that process, it would be open. It would be open to interpretation. It would be open to interpretability. It would be open to different agents testing the logic of other agents. And then we can observe this behavior before allowing action. That's the whole thing in a nutshell as to why this might be better.
That's great. And so on the base of this, and this is the one that you think hopefully is the future of AGI, you have this very detailed and ambitious, I'd say, proposal about a global AGI agency. What does that look like?
Yeah, it's a good question. Okay, so there are a few. So what I don't do in the report, just so the listeners know, is I don't like clearly identify exactly what a specific agency would be and what its like power, like organizational structure should be. I don't like answer those questions. Instead, I provide like a number of elements that a global AGI agency would be. Okay. The basic idea is that you have this open AGI and that it exists out in the world and it's able to be like made. But because of how powerful such a thing would be, we don't want a bunch of them running around in the world. This was also one of the assumptions that went into the report is what might a world look like with one single AGI. So it's baked in. Doesn't mean there couldn't be multiple ones of them. But you have one open AGI agency. And you have all these kind of narrow AIs that are participating in that decision making, but that it is controlled globally, that it would be part of some global institution that is overseeing the data that goes into it, that's overseeing how its decisions are made, and that is overseeing access to such a model. Because if we really had AGI in the way that we think about it, there's a really strong case for why you might not just want everyone to have access to such a thing. So the idea is like, how would we globally think about controlling this open AGI agency? And I talked about a few elements of this. One is like, what would that institution look like at a high level? And it needs to be global. It needs to have the relevant global powers. Also, I think it needs to have the relevant private sector companies involved, because in today's world, this is actually where the AIs are being developed. They're not being developed by governments. They're being developed by the private sector. So you want to have those as part of this framework. You also want to have international norm-setting institutions like the IEEE, these professional organizations that would also be a part of this. So in like some ideal world, you have the major global players, you have the major private company or public company players, and you have the relevant like professional institutions that work together to decide what the input should be, what the data should be and how it should be stored, and who should have access in a structured way to the outputs. The other piece of this that I borrowed from Eric Drexler, you can tell that I'm a fan, is this idea of structured transparency. So one of the big concerns about AI systems are things like privacy is one, and another is like access to the model themselves being somewhat proprietary or being something that we want to protect. And structured transparency is this idea, again, from Drexler, that we can actually think about these things as different components of a system. Kind of like with the open agency AGI, that like we could have structured access, that certain actors could have access to certain components of an AGI, but not all of it. That's kind of like the basic idea. Okay, the other component of this that is important for the world is if you had such a system, you do want broad democratic accountability. So you need some systems that make sure the governments and the companies and the professional norm setting organizations are held accountable to the global public in an ideal world, and that the global public benefits from access to such a model. So that it isn't just some small set of actors that get access to it, that the whole world can benefit from it. And as we'll talk about, some of this stuff is challenging to think about politically and how we might do it in the real world. But my idea is that if we could do such a thing, if you could bring the right stakeholders together and try to align their incentives best you can, and you had this kind of open AGI agency that could be inspected, and you could have the structured transparency thing that allows you to access different components without everyone having access to everything. And you had some democratic accountability oversight, and you had democratic access. This would be the ideal situation, given that we had a world with an AGI.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you for that. It's a bold vision. And I think it's wonderful to think about and to consider, because we do need to lay out different. And as you point out in your paper, there are other ideas out there. There are other experiments. But this, at least, is in line with a lot of the ambitions expressed also at the Summit of the Future in the UN, at the UN back in September. And so I think it's a good reflection. It's a good time to bring this forward. But as you hinted, there are a lot of obstacles. I started today's conversation by saying we are witnessing the fracturing of the global order. I'm not sure it's a one-way train, but hopefully we can restore some of that back and we can restore some of that balance. But at least in the short term, things don't look good. And we are likely, and this has been, by the way, it's not just last year or last 3 months, this has been going on for some years, a fragmentation of the global order. When you think about like even negotiations on climate change, when you think about trade, there's been a lot of regional trade rather than global. So this proposal in a way runs counter to the zeitgeist, that runs counter to this particular moment that we're having in history. And of course, from a Hegelian perspective, that's great. Ideas move history forward. So this is one of those ideas that could become a thesis of sorts and create its own dialectic. But here's then the question for you. I mean, you're very honest about the challenges ahead. You outline not one, not two, not three, but 10 major hurdles. These are not small. This is international cooperation challenge, right? You have AI superpowers, US, China, the EU, centralization of power risks. So just by centralizing, in a way, you're going back to the unitary model because you're centralizing the decision-making. Innovation and competition concerns, which is no small feat. Private sector resistance. We're not sure. I mean, we see what's happening in DC right now and other places, even in France, where there's pushback about that. A representation and fairness issues. I think this may be a little bit, I think you can overcome that. I think we do a good job internationally at representing different voices. Complexity of governance. Again, there's enough smart people there that can sort this out. Technical challenges. I think that's probably overcomable. Democratic accountability limitations. AI can actually solve some of that problems, right? In terms of the hive intelligence. And I think when I look at your open model, it feels a little bit like we're using hive intelligence, right? We're using kind of like the intelligence of crowds, but the crowds here are actually chatbots or AI models. And then security information risks, more centralized, the more risky those are. I guess I'm talking myself out of the challenges, so maybe there is a way of overcoming those challenges. So maybe it's not as many. Maybe there's 3. International cooperation, centralization, innovation, competition, and private sector. That's 4 of them. What do you think? I guess I'm getting optimistic as I talk about it. What do you think of these challenges with regards to your proposal?
So I'm an academic deep in my heart. And so I wanted to list all the things that were like honest reflections of what seemed challenging to me. They're not meant to be equally challenging. And it does start on reflection. I can't say that I did this on purpose at the time, but I think you're right that the first few challenges are the more difficult ones. And that some of these other things are like challenges, but maybe not like fatal challenges. The two that really, I think the first 3 are probably the ones that are the most difficult. So international cooperation challenges, as you say, the global order is shifting and maybe fragmenting. And we're trying to avoid global power, literal war right now, trying to avoid that. But there's some challenges there. The U.S., I think it's fair to say the U.S. is retrenching from some of its role as a global power, particularly under the new direction under the current administration. And so the U.S. would have been a major player and is a major player in trying to push forward these international cooperation things. And I think the U.S. is currently right now moving back from those and in some ways is being antagonistic towards some of its classic partners. We see this kind of playing out with the tariff war in the U.S. towards the EU and towards Canada and Mexico. And so I think one reasonable interpretation is that the global order is continuing to fragment. And you can't get this done, I don't think, without the U.S. as a major player. There's one, just like the economic powerhouse of it, but 2 is 7 of the top 10 AI companies that are making these things are coming out of the U.S. and the other 3 are coming out of China. And if the 2 of them can't find ways to cooperate on these things, it's hard to imagine that much gets done. Now, there is a proposal that I think is a reasonable way to start. And it's this notion of chips for peace, which has been out. And this is the idea that maybe the US in particular could partner with allies, hopefully like the EU and hopefully some other liberal democracy type countries, and build like a coalition of resources and then use carrots and incentives and sometimes sticks, but mostly carrots to get more countries on over time. And that you slowly let countries opt into this international cooperation with AI.
Well,
So I think that's another approach.
no, I think that's fantastic. So let me, just last question. We've gone longer than, well, I knew it was going to be long. So this is...
I like to talk, as you know.
No, but this is an interesting topic, obviously. And I knew that when we get started, it's difficult to stop. And that's a good thing. Hopefully, it's a good thing. I guess the listeners will have to decide for themselves. But are you optimistic? I start with a pessimistic note about the fragmentation. And again, you note that we're observing that. And I use a different term. You actually said shifting. I was using fragmentation. And I like also your kind of take on that, the global governance model, or just generally global politics. Yeah, where are you staying on this? Are you optimistic going forward on global governance of AI generally, specifically, but just generally about the global order?
I think I can't help but be optimistic. I think you also finished our last conversation with this question, and I waffled back and forth, which I think I'll probably do a little bit again. One, if you look at the current trends, I think there's lots of reason for pessimism. There's lots of reason to think that we would struggle to have a coordinated response to these things. AI capabilities are advancing fast. It's not clear if AGI is right around the corner or not, but already current systems can do some pretty powerful things and will continue to do so, is my take. So I guess my answer is that I expect that if we are lucky, is a weird way to put this, but I think if we are lucky, there will be what we call in the space warning shots. And that as AI does get more capable, there will be examples of things going poorly for large groups. And I think at that point, humanity does sometimes often respond in a coordinated way if it is clear that the threat is to all of humanity. I think absent of something like that, it's hard to imagine in the short term getting the type of cooperation that you would like. But I do think that if AGI, for example, does arrive in a handful of years, and that's actually what happens, it will be impossible to ignore. And it will be clear that there needs to be some type of restructuring of how we all get along. And I think we might end up in a world where that's true, right? That if we could create such systems, which is an open question, but it's a common human problem to not lose out to machines, to go back to if we can control these things or not. And I think self-interest, if it becomes clear to leaders that it is the case that we have these capabilities that are hard to control and are more powerful than large groups of humans, it will be in every country's interest to survive. And I do think that if we can appeal to country and people's self-interest of surviving and flourishing, that then you could get some action. Now, have we done this with climate change? Maybe. Right? Like maybe we're making some progress. I think there's mixed evidence. We didn't get a completely coordinated agreeing and following through on standards, but there's some evidence that as a planet, we're responding to these things. There's some evidence that nuclear is another example, which I talked about early in this that we didn't talk about, but did the world respond intelligently to the creation of nuclear weapons? I don't know. It depends on the US. But when was the last time a nuclear weapon was launched? I think it's 1944, 1945. We've seen no nuclear weapons launched in whatever that is, 70, 80 years now. So I think there is room for like when things get real, that humanity often does step up to the plate. And so that gives me some optimism.
That's good. And Justin, one thing that I think we have learned through these conversations and others is that, you know, when it comes to AI generally, but AGI governance isn't just a technical issue. It's a governance issue. It's a human
100%.
issue.
100%.
And so I think it feels like the technical part of it is actually simpler. And actually, in line with that, maybe this is a short public service announcement for our for our listeners. But if any of you are interested in learning more about this, we will actually have Justin join us in June of this year, of 2025, for the Global Governance's Summer School on AI and global governance. This is a 5-day program. We're focused actually on things that we talk here on this podcast, on AI governance challenges in this very complex global world. We have expert-led sessions, institutional visits, I think with EU, NATO, UNDP, usually geared at some professionals, people that are mid-career, or even graduate students that are interested on these particular issues. We will have 5 days of sessions. And like I said, Justin will be participating in at least 2 of those. And then we have others as well that are contributing. So if this isn't enough for you, come and join us in Brussels. He'll be also available also online, but also in person between June 10th and 15th or 14th of 2025. More on that. I'll put a link also in our show notes. Justin, thank you so much for everything. Thank you for your contribution. Thank you again for this daring proposal. I think it's an important one, an important part of the conversation.
Appreciate it, Medlir. Always a pleasure to talk with you, and always a pleasure to talk about these things that seem very important for us to think about.
Likewise. And thank you, of course, our listeners for tuning in to Age of AI. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, share, and stay informed about the latest in AI governance. Until then, stay human.